If there is no God, all things are permissible. Hi guys, my name is James. I'm with the Ought Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about the moral argument for God's existence. So we're just going to dive straight into it. So the core format of the argument is premise one: if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise two: objective moral values and duties do exist. 3, which is the conclusion, therefore God exists. Today I'm going to be really going after, obviously, premises 1 and 2. If either premise collapses, the conclusion collapses. But I think both premises are wrong. So premise 1, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. So I guess the question becomes, what do we mean by the word objective? For me, morality objectively exists within a framework. The framework is mind dependent. Let's take an example. Chess. Chess is a mind dependent game. It has rules. It has, we have programs that will show us in real time, the moment someone makes a move, objectively how good that move was. So anybody who's ever watched chess and you've watched the chess bar on the left or right, somebody makes a blunder and all of a sudden, the meter swings heavy, right? What's going on is that person just made objectively a bad move. And we know this because we know all the possibilities in chess. Luckily, it is finite, and luckily that finitude is within the capabilities of a computer program to decide. So I would say with premise 1, we can have conversations about objective moral values and duties within a framework. So let's take secular humanism. Now, secular humanism requires a leap to get into. You have to say to yourself, okay, I think humans are a good thing. And we could say that statement is rooted in a tribalistic speciesism, that our oughts derived for human flourishing are all because of some kind of naturalistic, maybe emotivistic reasons and rationale. And we can simply say, but there's nothing outside of that framework that gives your framework any more special pizzazz than any other framework. As Andrew Wilson likes to say, I like Christian nationalism, or, the reason why I want it is because I want it, and that's his attack on, atheistic or secular positions, because if you were to throw it all away, there's nothing there. It's just, emotivism in its purest form. But I would say that my challenge to that is simply saying, right, but emotivism still has rationalities and justifications worked out, or maybe we use rationality to create justifications to create our moral oughts. But I would still say that from those positions, I would say a rationally justified emotivism would be a framework that we could work with. Of course, obviously, I accept that theistic frameworks could also make valid moral objective or objective moral values and duties within a Christian framework. I would say that a good way for the theist to sit here and say, well, it's a theist, God is our foundation. I would simply say, if you're a Christian, ask yourself, do you think Sharia law is moral? Do you think that the laws, that a religious tradition outside of your own is moral? Do you think, like, if you're Christian or Muslim, vice versa, doesn't matter, just whichever side you're on, just look at the other side and say, yeah, God gives them morals, or would you disagree? So for me, this isn't just when we say, oh, well, theism gives us this thing, I would say, right, but you would even still point to other theists and say they're wrong. If somebody says, my God says this, and you say, but my God says that, how do you determine who's the moral one. You really, it's just a theistic version of Andrew Wilson's own argument, right? It boils down to because I want it, right? You can't objectively prove one side or the other. So I think that, again, everybody, theist and atheist alike, has to find a framework in order to start having these concepts or these conversations around these things. You know, within a framework, I could argue for objective moral values and duties. I could say you ought do these things within this framework. And so really the question is, do you approve of the framework or not? You know, and so maybe that's where the emotivism comes into. But I think that, again, this is going to afflict both theist and non-theist. I think it's afflicting everybody. You must have a framework in order to have these kind of conversations, or, you know, about moral values and duties. Objective moral values and duties do exist. I think that I wrapped, again, I feel like it's a little hard to talk about premise 1 and premise 2 individually. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Again, to me, they exist within a framework, but they don't exist outside of the framework. There's no tangible boo-ness in the universe. There's no tangible hooray-ness in the universe. There's no tangible thou shouts that you can physically touch that is in the universe. You know, I think that, you know, for me, when I look at the universe, I can focus on the fact that, yeah, maybe the universe has some life permissiveness, but the vast majority of it does not. And when you look at the life permissiveness that's here on our planet, you know, our planet being the only area that we are aware of that is life permissive, we could simply look at the arbitrary nature of morality all throughout nature. You know, I think that just saying that morality exists naturally, I think requires argumentation and justification to arrive at those conclusions. It's not self-evident. It's really, I think, kind of the point I'm trying to make with that. So I think that premise 2, just saying objective moral values and duties do exist, is not in itself self-evident. That requires its own premises to reach the conclusion that moral values and duties do in fact exist. And again, this is a beginner's guide, right? So there's going to be lots and lots and lots and lots of conversation about this. And so don't take this as the definitive counter to the argument, but this is just kind of my initial thoughts and views on this about, you know, hey, does objective moral values and duties exist, you know, so on and so forth. I'm just saying I think that they exist within a framework, but not outside of it. You know, so I've kind of given a couple of quick counter examples, but I do want to say that part of this conversation goes into moral realism versus moral anti-realism. Like the anti-realist would be somebody like Alex O'Connor being the emotivist, just saying boo, murder, hooray, philanthropy, right? Like that would be an example of it. It avoids David Hume's is-ought problem because there is no is-ought problem with emotivism. It's just simply yay, you know, good things that I consider good, boo, things I consider bad, but it's ultimately just emotions, and there are no oughts that one can derive. You're just simply saying, this is my emotional state when confronted with these ideas. Whereas, like moral realism, again, I think that you have to make that leap. You know, it's going to require some form of just absurd leap. And when I say the word absurd, in case that comes out, I always feel like I have to defend that word a little bit. Like when I say absurd, I don't mean in a clown sense. I just simply mean in a unjustifiable sense. You know, it's like if I say you have to absurdly, it's like a brute fact. You know, like, you know, if you were to say morality is a brute fact, you're just saying that I can't justify the existence of morality, but I believe morality exists. Kind of like a rock exists, therefore morality exists, and, you know, so objective moral values and duties do exist in a brute fact sense. I think that morality is not like a rock, you know, so I don't think that there's any tangibleness to, you know, boo-ness and hooray-ness. I think those are emotional states within one's mind, and then rationality allows us to take those things and turn them into justifications. And that's how we get to law and order, is through rationale and justifications, not through just emotions. Because there are things that we can find, I'm sure, that we are confronted with that make us go, ugh, but we would say, but I don't want that to be illegal. And you know what I mean? Like we could say, while I personally find it distasteful, I think that would be a worse world to live in, to outlaw this thing that causes distaste. You know, I don't want to give any, things because I don't want to get sidetracked, but simply to say, I think we can all think of something that we think is ew, but, do you think we should make it illegal? You would say, no, it's just gross, but I don't think it should be illegal. Yep, I think that's basically the quick dirtyism. I do want to share Kantian ethics, talking about the categorical imperative. I think this is quite valid within the conversation. Again, I think this still requires, like kind of that framework idea, but I do think as a conversation about emotivism and, people when they sit here and say, oh, well, because I want it, and, we're kind of implying just kind of the ridiculous nature of atheistic morality. I would simply say, like, Kant's justification for not does not care about what you want. Let's say the desire is, I want to lie to get out of trouble. I'm in, if I just make up something, maybe that person won't be mad at me. Little white lies. When I was growing up, my mom can attest, I lied about everything. Sometimes I just lied to see if I can get away with it. And sometimes I lied because I was scared and I didn't want to face the music, so to speak, but either way, I lied a lot when I was a young kid. In the rational test, well, what happens if everyone lies when they're in trouble? Well, if everyone lies, then the very concept of trust and truth destroys itself. Lying becomes impossible because no one believes anyone anyway. So the whole society collapses. Effectively, we're arguing that lying is irrationally self-defeating. You ought not lie, not because God said so, not because it makes you feel boo, but because lying is a violation of logic itself. And I think that that's a valid way to kind of think about morality, honestly, in a sans emotivism way, is to simply say, well, how can I test my oughts against this notion? And I think that's a rational way to reach oughts, to reach moral values and duties. I think that's a valid way to approach those things. So, again, it's a quick dirty. There's quite a bit, I'm sure, to talk about this, but suffice to say, I find the moral argument for God's existence, I find premise 1 and premise 2 to not work, to collapse. So ultimately, the conclusion, therefore God exists, I find to be problematic. So that's my down and dirty response to the moral argument for God. Again, as always, guys, there's a comment section. If you want to, challenge any of the things I said, please hit me up. I've got my good buddy Josh. He's just got a vacation, so he wasn't able to make it today. So Josh, buddy, if you've got a response, of course, hit me up with it. And of course, as a friendly reminder to my theistic friends who are like, God does exist, there's lots and lots of arguments for God's existence. Today we're just hyper focusing on the moral argument. But if there's another argument like the fine-tuning argument or William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, of course, guys, we're going to get to it. And actually, that might just be the very next video I turn around and make. All right, guys, thank you so much for your time. Use the comment section if you have anything you want to say. Challenge my ideas. This is not I am dictating to you facts. It's just a conversation. So, if you disagree. If you like, you like. Say whatever your heart says. I'm doing this not because I'm trying to make internet monies. I have a full-time job. I'm a blue-collar guy. I'm just doing this because I want to be part of the conversation. I'm tired of sitting on the sidelines watching others have the conversation. And I think it's time for me to step out of my comfort zone and start just putting my ideas and thoughts out there. Again, thank you so much for your time, guys. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day.